Hi, everybody. Welcome. Come on in. It's really nice to see you. Hello, hello. Bienvenido. Welcome, welcome. We'll just give folks a few more minutes to join us. Bienvenidos. Si necesitan interpretación en español, hagan clic en el globo en la pantalla de Zoom que se dice interpretación. Welcome. If you want to drop in the chat where you're calling in from and who you are, go ahead. We'll get started in just a bit. Everybody, welcome. Give it just another minute. Probably turn the music down. Nice fade, DJ Amanda. Thank you. Welcome everybody. We have a few more folks still coming on the line. Welcome to I think we're at session 5 of the Gender Justice Jam. Bienvenidos, y si necesitan interpretación, hay un botón que parece como un pequeño globo en la parte inferior de la pantalla de Zoom. Hagan clic en él y elige español. I am your host, Aaron Scott. My pronouns are he, him. I'm the staff officer for gender justice for the presiding bishop's office here at the Episcopal Church, supporting all gender justice, LGBTQ, and women's ministries church-wide. You are joining us for session 5 of the Gender Justice Jam, defending trans children and youth. And I'm super, super honored to have our special guest talk in just a few minutes here. But before we do that, let's get grounded, and we'll start with our land acknowledgement. If you know the original people of the land that you are zooming in from, you can go ahead and drop that in the chat. We're calling in from many different lands tonight. So I am zooming in from Tacoma, Washington. And I acknowledge that I'm on the traditional homelands of the Puyallup and Nisqually tribes, as well as on lands with deep significance to other Coast Salish tribes. So Coast Salish people have lived on and stewarded these lands since time immemorial and continue to do so today. And I extend my deepest gratitude to past, present, and future generations. I am so excited and so honored that we get to be joined tonight by Dr. Nathali Szilagyi from the Yale Child Study Center, as well as our very own Office of Government Relations, Alan Yarborough and Lindsay Delks. You are going to hear from them in just a little bit, but let's let's do a little prayer and Bible study before we start. And if you have prayer requests you want to drop in the chat so we can lift them up as we pray together, go right ahead. God, thank you for the gift of children and young people in our lives, in our church, and in this world. You've been very clear again and again in your word that our job is to support and uplift the dignity and the freedom of children and of young adults. And we ask that you're with us in our time together tonight as we learn how best to do that in the most inclusive, most affirming, most expansive dream of God. Thank you for our special guests, and keep us always mindful of those who are calling out to you and need you closest to them in this time. Amen. Okay. Let's go to Bible study tonight. So I think we've got screen sharing, and oh, I'm sorry. I skipped our security and housekeeping. Before we do Bible study, we are very happy to see folks back in this room. Some of you have joined us for every session. Some of you are joining us for the first time, and that's okay. We've got folks calling in from 9 different countries and 33 states at any given week, and we are providing live simultaneous translation in both Spanish and American Sign Language. And again, I'm just going to announce the translation if anybody has joined late. Bienvenidos, y si necesitan interpretación, hay un botón que parece como un globo en la parte inferior de la pantalla de Zoom. Hagan clic en él y elige español para escuchar en español. Okay, so our security and housekeeping rules. Just a reminder, we have a zero tolerance policy for bullying, harassment, threats, and hate speech in this series. So if you undertake any of those things, you will be immediately removed from the Zoom room by our tech team, and you will not be able to rejoin future sessions. Number 2, just a reminder, while we will debate many things in this series, we are not debating the personhood, the sanctity, or the right to spiritual leadership of LGBTQ people and their families in this class. We're also not debating whether all people deserve safe, legal access to reproductive health care. And we are not debating whether people deserve to live free from violence in all its forms. So if you have questions about any of that, you can refer to the stances of the General Convention of the Episcopal Church. And then just a final reminder that this is a public series. We will be recording this session. I think right after I finish these ground rules, Amanda, you can hit record. So just be aware of the information that you're sharing in our Q&A. Don't out anybody who isn't already out. Don't use identifying information if you're not sure somebody would want you talking about them, and also just be mindful of the information you choose to disclose about yourself. We super honor everybody's choices around sharing their testimonies publicly, and we also just recognize that it's not always safe to do that. So finally, if you have any tech issues, please chat us. I can't see the chat tonight because my laptop died, so I'm calling in from my phone. But Amanda is watching, and it sounds like we've got a few people in the waiting room. Okay. I think that's it for housekeeping. So, Amanda, if you want to hit record, we'll start with our Bible study, hear from our guests, and then do more Bible study after that. And I think we have a slide from, or not a slide, but I think Amanda, could you share the first passage of scripture?
Yes.
And maybe we Yay.
Can
Thank you. Oh,
everyone see that?
yes. Awesome. Thank you. So we usually up until this point have been reading the most easily affirming passages that we could find in scripture. Now we're starting to pivot a little bit today and move toward texts that have been used often to justify gender injustice. So can we get a reader to do this one in English, and then we'll follow it up in Spanish? You want to just raise your hand, hit your hand raise button if you want to read. I see Kristen.
Then God said, "Let us make humans in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the wild animals of the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth." So God created humans in his image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the sea, over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves upon the earth."
Thank you so much. And I think we've got another Genesis slide in Spanish this time. Nope, in English. So, Kristen, if you want to read the second English slide, there's two accounts of creation here. So let's go to the perfect.
Okay. Then the Lord God said, "It is not good that the man should be alone. I will make him a helper as his partner." So out of the ground the Lord formed every animal of the field and every bird of the air, and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whatever the man called every living creature, that was its name. The man gave names to all the cattle, and to the birds of the air, and to every animal of the field. But for the man there was not found a helper as his partner. So the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man, and he slept. Then he took one of his ribs and closed up its place with flesh. And the rib that the Lord God had taken from the man, he made into a woman and brought her to the man. Then the man said, "This at last is the bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. This one shall be called woman, for out of man this one was taken."
Thank you so much, Kristen. And if we could get a reader in Spanish for those same two passages, Genesis 1 and 2, just hit your hand raise button. I see Elizabeth. There we go.
Entonces dijo, ahora hagamos al hombre a nuestra imagen. Él tendrá poder sobre los peces, las aves, los animales domésticos y los salvajes, y sobre los que se arrastran por el suelo. Cuando Dios creó al hombre, lo creó a su imagen, varón y mujer los creó, y les dio su bendición. Tengan muchos, muchos hijos, llenen el mundo y gobiérnenlo. Dominen a los peces y a las aves, y a todos los animales que se arrastran.
Awesome. And if we could go to the Genesis 2 in Spanish, this one as well.
Luego Dios el Señor dijo, no es bueno que el hombre esté solo. Le voy a hacer a alguien que sea una ayuda adecuada para él. Y Dios el Señor formó de la tierra todos los animales y todas las aves y se los llevó al hombre para que les pusiera nombre. El hombre les puso nombre a todos los animales domésticos, a todas las aves y a todos los animales salvajes. Y ese nombre se les quedó. Sin embargo, ninguno de ellos resultó ser la ayuda adecuada para él. Entonces Dios el Señor hizo caer al hombre en un sueño profundo, y mientras dormía le sacó una de las costillas y le cerró otra vez la carne. De esa costilla el Señor hizo una mujer y se la presentó al hombre, el cual al verla dijo, esta sí que es de mi propia carne y de mis propios huesos. Se va a llamar mujer porque Dios la sacó del hombre.
Thank you so much. Thank you to both of our readers. And I'm sure you've heard Genesis before. I'm sure folks have heard it used all kinds of ways. Both of these passages. I know that I have. Feel free to drop in the chat if there's something spicy that you've heard about with both of these readings with regard to gender justice. I just wanted to share a little bit that Liz and I were talking about these two passages together before class, and uh, it's important to notice that there's two different accounts here, right? Two different accounts of the creation story. And that is helpful for us to pay attention to because that's like a flag on the play that there was some kind of contentious thing going on with how one version of the story was being presented, at least. You can sort of think of this as like the same way with how we have four different gospels. They're all different, and everybody was like, "No, wait a minute! Like you didn't quite nail it with that one, so we're going to throw this one in as well." Liz shared this thing with me that one of our New Testament professors, when I was in seminary, had shared. Brigitte Call. She said, "There's this thing happening when we talk about Adam and Eve and these two different creation stories that really mirrors what we see happen so much in the Bible, where God is like, try this, like try things this way, and the people are like, no, no, give us a social order that is this way. Give us, for example, a king. Give us a easy return to Egypt where we might still be in slavery, but where at least we know when our next meal is coming." And God's always like, "But have you considered?" And they're like, "No, we won't consider. We want what is familiar, even if it reproduces all these hierarchies and injustices." So looking at this text from that lens, I think is very helpful. Because it becomes less about, oh, there's two different accounts of creation, right? And one, like, what day were the whales created? Like, that's not the core issue here as much as it is about what does it mean to bring order out of chaos, as Liz put it today. And do we have some options from God about what that could mean? Is God's invitation to do that ordering for the sake of justice, or is it just about setting up the same social systems of exclusion and unjust structures? So, thinking about these texts, there's a long history of interpretation, especially prominent in Jewish midrash, that emphasize that male and female, God created them, actually means male and female within one body. So some of you may have read the article we were sharing the first few weeks of class about the 8 genders in the Talmud. And this touches on that. It's an article by Rachel Scheinerman. We can share it after this class. And Scheinerman wrote, "In fact, not only did the rabbis recognize 6 genders that were neither male nor female, they had a tradition that the first human being was both." And versions of this midrash are found throughout rabbinic literature, including one that says Adam was first created with 2 faces, one male and the other female. And then later, this original human being was separated and became 2 distinct people. It goes on, the article goes on and shares how different rabbis over the centuries have taught this text, and that it's not simply thinking back to what this creation story was about, most of the citations about this figure, this two-gendered figure, the androgynos, is not this mythic creature of the past, and not a person with two heads, right? This is a term that appears in the Talmud, in the Mishnah, in the Mishnah 32 times, and in the Talmud 283 times, referring to this double-gendered person. And most of those citations are not about this creation story, but they're about how to apply the law, to people who do not fit in the gender binary. I think it's also helpful from a gender justice lens to think about this reading and not impose patriarchy on the text when it might not actually be there. So we hear this text used so much to justify like the subservient role of women, right? Well, Eve was created like as a secretary for Adam, right? Like from his, just like one of his ribs, a very incomplete being. But there's a lot of problems with that textually. The first is that the word for help that's used here, that Eve will be a help to Adam, is not a subservient position. I'm not a Hebrew scholar, but the ezer is the word for help here, and that's actually the kind of help that is very powerful. Is often the kind of help that God gives. So it's not like a helping servile role. It is a role of power and partnership. It's often a kind of like life-saving kind of help. And then one last point, just along, the layers to this stuff, is there's a great article we can share at the end of this too. It's from Catholic Moral Theology on a queer reading of this text. And it highlights this part in Genesis 2 where Adam he's lonely and wants a helper. And so God at first is like, well, here's a bird. A bird could help you, right? Maybe the elephants can help you. Maybe the eels, like one by one, the animals and the birds are presented. But no helper is found there. And this what shifts is that finally Adam is presented with somebody who he's like, oh, I like this person. Uh, there's this recognition that it's up to us to decide who our partner should be, who is right for us. This recognition and acceptance of an appropriate companion for us, that actually we're allowed to choose that. That is foundational in this story. So there's this long list of ways that this text is much more complicated than we often are told it is. But I just wanted to use that to set us up for shifting from the text that can be so clearly used as, a testament to the long time existence of third gender people, to now moving into texts that they trouble us a little bit, or they've been used for the purpose of injustice, especially with regard to gender. Any thoughts about that before we throw it to our speakers? Anything jump out at folks? And you can raise your hand if you want to. No? We'll come back to it at the end too, if you want to just think about it for a while. Reverend Liz, do you want to say anything? Or you?
I just kind of want to highlight or repeat kind of how you started, which is that in both of these, again, somewhat competing stories, in both of them, the human that is first created is non-binary, isn't, or it's multi-binary. This is not a man that's created first. It's not a woman that's created first. It's a human that, and in fact, in that Genesis 1 text, God's using inclusive pronouns, because God is saying God created them. And that's the first, pronouns that are put on humans as them. It's a plural, but it's also them, like in terms of how we translate it. And in Genesis 2, in that same kind of Catholic biblical theology piece, it points out that rib can also be translated, and more accurately, most likely translated, side. And that just like that two-faced human, that two-sided human is a human that God thinks we should be in the image of. But as Aaron was pointing out, we so often want to go back to the social order we're used to, even if it does not serve us. And so out of that, the female side is taken from the human. And there we have a more binary gender piece that goes on. And so I just think there's something really beautiful, and that we should kind of pause and notice that in both of these, they might disagree in various places, but they both agree that that God's creation of humans in God's image are not binary characters.
Awesome. Thank you. I think we got one hand up from Miranda, so let's hear Miranda.
I realize that the focus of this series is on gender justice and matters relating to like the queer experience and that kind of thing. But I'm really struck by this idea that the word helper isn't a subservient role, and that God's first response to humanity being alone is to present us with animals. And it's got me wondering, like, what changes if we think about creation in that way, where it's not about, and it just like, it contrasts a lot more with like have dominion over the earth and subdue it. But like, what happens if we add that imagery and that idea of life-saving help to the natural world around us? And I imagine there's also ways that then that has to change how we relate to other people as well. I just thought that was really interesting.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, because it reminded me, and we'll go to our presenters after this, but it reminded me, it's only in Genesis 1 that, so here's male and female, God created them, the first human, this genderful human, who, that is the being who is given dominion. It doesn't go like God made Adam and then took a little rib out of Adam and made his little helper Eve, and then said, you're in charge of everybody. It's actually, there's this multi-gendered being who is given dominion. What does dominion mean if it doesn't fit into this hierarchical social order? Is it actually something completely different? Because that's not offered in Genesis 2. It's only in Genesis 1. So I think that's an awesome point. Whew. That's a little warm up. I hope everybody's feeling it. And I think maybe this is a good time to turn it over to Dr. Nathali. Please pronounce the H, Szilagyi, from the Yale Child Study Center. So excited to have you with us, and thank you for making time for us.
Oh no, thank you. Thank you so much, Erin, for like asking me. I'm thrilled, seriously. And that was like mind blowing. That's awesome. I'm gonna have to look up all the like sources and stuff you were talking about. That's yeah, yeah, flipping things kind of around and upside down. I love that. I love that. So for slides, is Amanda going to? Oh, yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, this first one got messed up. I have apples, and when I switched it to PowerPoint, I think this is the only big mess up. But yeah, I'm in private practice. I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist as well as an adult psychiatrist. And I do a lot of work with gender diverse youth and their families. I work at the Yale Child Study Center as well, and I'm put in a plug for St. Paul's Episcopal Church, Wallingford, Connecticut. So we just got a new priest, so we're all really pumped. Let's see. Oh, I probably can't forward it. I'm sorry, Amanda. Should I like wave at you? And my last name's Szilagyi, but nobody can pronounce it unless you're Hungarian, and that's okay. Well,
sorry, I'm having some trouble.
okay.
Moving to the next screen.
Okay.
Is this the next screen, or did I just?
The next screen, you can skip
Okay.
that one. Just always put one of those in out of habit. Oh, no, we're backwards now.
You know what? Can I have 1 second? I think I need to download this to more
Okay.
accurately.
Okay.
Yes. We can wait. If anybody knows any good jokes about Adam and Eve, now is the time.
Well, Erin, I actually just downloaded very quickly, but Erin,
Right.
because you're on your phone, you missed a really fascinating conversation about being taught that that men had one less rib than women.
Oh, because I can't see the chat. Yes.
Yeah. And that is not scientifically accurate. There is, in fact, and this is really interesting to me, and I'm not just stalling for time. There is a mutation that is more common in men where you can have one less rib. But so that's maybe where that comes from. Let's get back to the topic at hand.
Oh, look, and now it looks good again. Okay, it lined up. Cool. Well, no, it didn't. All right. So, okay. So, I mean, you all know this, you know, that over the past probably 5 to 10 years, boy, it's in the news, right? Lots of stuff about, we lost the slide, but lots of stuff about trans youth, lots of stuff about gender diversity and gender issues. Oh, we're trying again. Okay. And lots more gender diverse youth are presenting for care to their primary care docs, but also to their, therapists, psychiatrists, school counselors. And this is the very bad downside. Lots of legislation restricting gender affirming care. You can go ahead. All right. I mean, this just, if you Google how many trans people are there, you'll get, 200,000 like instantly. So I just did some clips, and you can go ahead. But we know, historically, gender diversity has always existed. As long as we have recorded history, of gender diverse people across the world, across cultures. Just quickly, there's a trans man who served in the Civil War. There are the Indian Hijra who are, third gender. In the right bottom corner, Native American Two-Spirit people. And then on the left in their lovely rainbow coordinated dresses are the Fa'afine from Samoa. But it's everywhere. This isn't new. You can go ahead. So then the question, and when I give talks, Oh, to different groups, because you can tell it probably already. I get kind of fired up about this. I feel very passionate about this. And so I give talks to a lot of different groups, including like middle schoolers or high school students, all the way up to, professional organizations. And I often start by asking them, okay, give me, what percentage of people in the US identify as transgender? And as you might imagine, I get estimates that range from like 0.1% to like 40%. I have some parents tell me that half the kids at my kids' high schools are trans. And I kind of go, we probably need to talk a little about the difference between gender identity and gender expression, right? Like people who dress in gender non-conforming ways aren't always transgender, right? But so this is one large, very well done, reliable study from the Williams Institute at UCLA. Youth 13 to 17 across the US, only 1.4% identified as trans. Among adults, their numbers were about 0.6%. Part of the reason why I include the map is because you can see it's not just the East and West coasts, right? It's not just big cities, right? Trans people are everywhere, right? And I think sometimes some of the politicians who are creating anti-trans legislation or restrictions are acting as if there are no trans people in their state. Of course there are. So you can go ahead. More stats. This is also from the Williams Institute. Just breaking it down by all adults versus younger adults, 18 to 24, and you notice higher rates of younger adults identifying as trans. You can go ahead. This is a different study from Pew, a Pew Research Center in 2022, and about 5% of young adults say their gender is different than their sex assigned at birth. You can go to the next one. Again, just nutshell, right? Among all adults, about 0.6% said they were transgender, and you see higher rates in the 18 to 24-year-old age group and higher even in the 18 to 29 compared to all adults. Non-binary people, about 1% of all adults, and again, about 3% in the younger age groups from 18 to 29. So you can go ahead. And then, the bad news, right? We start off with lonesome little Arkansas in 2021 passed a law restricting and criminalizing gender affirming care for transgender children and adolescents. 2022, it picked up Alabama, Arizona, Texas, and then Florida. And then the next one, it gets ugly, right? 2023. And then so far in 2024, you can go to the next one. Right. Idaho had already passed restrictive laws, but this year they banned public funding for trans and gender non-binary people of all ages. And you can go to the next one. It's not like it's slowing down, right? More than 600 pieces of legislation restricting gender affirming care and restricting other civil rights of gender diverse youth have been introduced in state legislatures in the last year. Right. Ugly map from the Human Rights Campaign, or HRC. I keep having to update it, and of course it gets worse every time I update it. The red marked states are the states where law or policy banning gender affirming care for minors, for youth, has passed. A good friend of mine who is a trans woman expressed it to me this way, looking at this map. And she said, those gray parts are the only parts that's left of my country. Those are the only parts where I'm welcome. Right, so you can go ahead. This one got messed up, sorry. Unfortunately, there's a lot of evidence to show that those, those laws, those anti-trans laws, they've consistently been shown to have a negative impact on mental health outcomes for trans youth, but not just trans youth, all LGBTQ youth. Up until this year, although there was, again, abundant evidence to show this negative impact, it was sort of association. We couldn't really say much about causation. We know that states with anti-trans legislation subsequently have higher rates of bullying and violence and depression, and suicidal ideation, self-harm, suicide attempts toward and among LGBTQ youth as a whole. Just this year, though, in June, the Trevor Project did a very well done large study which actually established causation. Right? They showed that there were statistically significant increases in past year suicide attempts in trans and non-binary youth in states that enacted anti-trans laws. I mean, so hardcore, kick in the gut level, evidence there. It does matter. It does make a difference. So, all right, next one. And of course, it's highly politicized, right? Part of the reason why I get so fired up is, like, I'm a physician, right? And it just burns me up to see people making up stuff that is not only not supported by medical research or science or clinical experience, but that completely contradicts it. You can go ahead. So, of course, there are a lot of factors influencing this discourse around gender identity and gender-affirming care. Lots of bias and discrimination, cannot ignore that. Misinformation, misuse of scientific research and care protocols, misrepresentation, like what is gender-affirming care, creation of false equivalence about research quality in medical authorities. For example, saying that this one op-ed to a prominent journal can be cited with equal weight as, decades-long studies with solid evidence. That is frequently done. Okay, sorry, you can go ahead. I'm sorry, I tend to talk a lot, so I will try to speed through so we have time for questions. More factors, of course, political motivations, no question, right? And to be respectful, many people have religious and or cultural beliefs that make it very difficult for them to see the evidence or believe it or kind of feel it viscerally. Sometimes it's a difficulty understanding complex information. And oh boy, that last one got spewed all the way over to the right. The basic idea there is there are some very moral people who say, first, do no harm. We never want to do anything that harms youth. And if there's a possibility that providing gender-affirming care could harm youth, we should never do it. What those people often neglect to consider or consider appropriately is that the denial of gender-affirming care to trans and non-binary youth also causes harm, right? So, but that's a little bit of a mouthful to try to get out there. All right, you can go ahead. I put this in there. I'm originally from rural Ohio. I am lived the longest time in Shelby County, which is in Jim Jordan's district. And I put that in there because while, yes, my closest friends were smart people of goodwill who often agreed with me on religious and cultural issues, I also had a lot of friends who were smart people of goodwill who did not agree with me on things. And they would joke, they would joke if somebody made a homophobic, I used to be an ER physician before I went into psychiatry, and they would joke in the ER if somebody made a homophobic comment, they would go, ooh, she doesn't like that. And I would say, you're right, I don't like that. And they would just move on and make their homophobic jokes somewhere else, right? Yeah, anyway, but we can live with people who disagree with us. But yes, no, we have to watch out for when people are genuinely biased, hostile, hateful. I'm not trying to excuse that. I'm not. Okay, you can go ahead. So what gender affirming care is actually provided to minors? Like boatloads of misinformation out there. And you don't have to read these, they're terrible. But I put down some samples from trolls, right? Just stupid internet trolls making up stuff about, offering hysterectomies for young girls. Nobody does that. Nobody does that. But then there are 2 articles from like the National Review and the Wall Street Journal, which are spewing the same kind of misinformation, but only, denser vocabulary, right? People who really should know better should have done some research. Okay, you can go ahead. This is from The Law in Alabama, and it's blatantly false. Right? People in the medical community are aggressively pushing for interventions on minors that medically alter, hormone balance and remove healthy external and internal sex organs. No, that is not done. And they describe being trans, or they dismiss it as when the child expresses a desire to appear. Like, whoa, it's just all wrong. It's all false. All right, you can go ahead. What providers of gender affirming care actually do is actually follow established, peer-reviewed, evidence-based medical guidelines, right? WPATH is the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. It's a society of medical and behavioral health professionals. What they produce is heavily reviewed, evidence-based. It's incredibly cautious in their process. It's reliable, right? Endocrine Society is a society of endocrinologists. They are specialists in adult and pediatric medicine around treating not just diabetes and thyroid disease, but also medical issues around gender dysphoria. We have reliable guidelines. You can go ahead. So what is gender affirming care? Well, first of all, it's individualized. That's kind of one of the keys, right? It isn't, here's your algorithm. Okay, you click this box, tick this box, you go to that next step, you go to that next step. I've had a lot of parents literally say to me, okay, now we know my kid is trans. What's the timetable? What's next? And when do we start it? And I just always say, it's a gender journey. It's individualized, right? There is no timetable. The timetable will develop as we work with your kid and we help them to discern their gender journey, right? And it's developmentally appropriate, which means that you're not going to talk to a 5-year-old. And yes, 5-year-olds do show up at gender clinics or psychiatrists, because of gender dysphoria or diverse gender identities or gender exploration. You don't talk to a 5-year-old the same way you talk to a 17-year-old. You just don't. And that's appropriate. Key portions also, it's non-judgmental. And you don't have, in gender affirming care, we don't come in with the viewpoint of, here's the destination we want for the kid, right? We don't have an end goal other than we want everybody to be able to live their best, fullest, authentic life, right? And I'm glad, we're coming from a Christian perspective, right? We all want to grow into the people God wants us to be and made us to be. And variations in gender identity and expression are normal aspects of human diversity. They're a gift. They're not pathological. Mental health issues, and this is key, mental health issues occur at a much higher rate among LGBTQ people and among trans people, but it's not because of some inherent pathology or something broken. It's because of the stigma and rejection and their experience of sort of swimming in toxic, rejecting waters, right? You can go ahead. So gender affirming treatment options, big picture, one treatment option is no transition, right? There is no one size fits all. Some trans and non-binary people say, I know I'm trans or non-binary. That's cool. And they do not want to change name pronouns, how they dress, how they wear their hair, but lots do, right? That's social transition. Name, pronouns, how you express yourself. Things like, the name on your the gender on your birth certificate, the name on your passport, all that stuff. And then medical transition is another option. That would include medications such as puberty blockers, hormones, or surgeries in adults. You can go ahead. This is the point. It's a journey. It's not a straight line. It's not an algorithm. You don't tick boxes. It's not a bird guide. We don't go, oh, it has this, and this, therefore it must be a robin. No. It's much more complicated. People are much more interesting than that. So I'll fly through some of these. Does gender affirming care affect suicidality and mental health outcomes? Yes, gender affirming care decreases the risk of suicidality, including suicidal ideation and suicide attempts. And receiving care improves mental and physical health outcomes. You can go ahead. Yep, right. If trans youth do not receive timely care, they have much higher rates of risk for these and more unfortunate outcomes. You can go ahead. These stats are horrible, right? 40 to 60% of trans youth who do not receive treatment for gender dysphoria may attempt suicide. Pretty consistently, we get rates in the 40, 41, 42% for suicide attempts. Nobody can 100% reliably categorize suicides because of stigma and misgendering and all kinds of issues around knowing a person's true gender identity. And for trans youth who have comorbid eating disorders, the rates are even higher. It's just dreadful. You can go ahead. But positive news, right? Gender affirming care improves outcome, right? Gender dysphoria is real. Untreated gender dysphoria leads predictably to serious negative medical consequences, and gender affirming care improves those outcomes, including reducing rates of suicide. You can go ahead. This is a hard one because I could talk about this forever and ever, and I won't. But the first time I put together a talk on social contagion and rapid onset gender dysphoria, I had 7 slides on what was wrong with it. I will not give you 7 slides worth, but basically there is not good evidence to support this. There's not. All right, you can go ahead. It's still out there, right? So-called, air quotes, rapid onset gender dysphoria was defined by the creator of this hypothesis, Lisa Littman, as the presentation of trans-identified adolescents and young adults, basically who didn't seem gender dysphoric during childhood, and then their parents perceived them to have suddenly exhibited gender dysphoria during or after puberty, right? You can go ahead. Again, I'll try to fly through these. So Littman hypothesized that social contagion plays a big role. All right, you can go ahead. So social contagion is basically like the spread of unhealthy affect, as in feelings or emotions or behaviors, through a population. In other words, she talked about, oh, well, kids go online and they get influenced by their peers, and they influence each other in ways that harm each, right? Potentially promotes emotions and behaviors that can potentially undermine their own development or harm others. She pathologized any non-cisgender identities, right? She compared a trans identity to anorexia nervosa. She described cluster outbreaks, and I'm not making this up, deviancy training, right? Like kids they get infected, they get contagion, right? Now, they believe they're trans because of deviant peers online. You can tell this really ticks me off. It really does. You can go ahead. There were so many flaws. Again, this is 7 pages, 7 slides worth. that Lippmann didn't even ask the youth. She recruited parents from anti-trans websites to enroll. The parents had to already believe that something was weird and it wasn't real, that their offspring suddenly came out as trans. It was a poorly done study. There was no online security, all kinds of problems, and including like assuming that when trans adolescents came out to their parents, it was immediately after they realized they were trans. And I was like, have you ever met an adolescent? Do you have kids? Because adolescents don't tell everything to their parents minute one, day one, especially if they suspect their parents are going to be angry or rejecting, right? You're not going to share that. But all right, again, I told you I can get on my high horse about this one, but you can go ahead. It was a mess. They required retractions, corrections. It's been thoroughly debunked by reputable peer-reviewed academic journals. And yet, yeah, you can go to the next one. It's everywhere, and it's still everywhere. Websites and articles, it's everywhere. You can go ahead. No clinical studies have found that it exists. Next one. No professional organizations recognize rapid onset gender dysphoria as a clinical condition or diagnosis. You can go ahead. She created it as a hypothesis. The prior body of evidence didn't support it, and the subsequent body of evidence did not support it. You can go ahead. The social contagion theory still gets talked about a lot, even among people who have recognized that if they say rapid onset gender dysphoria, they'll be dismissed. So you'll still hear social contagion. Problems with this. Well, one, essential misunderstanding of how gender identity develops. It suggests that external factors can change gender identity, and a clear underlying assumption that trans identity is not a desirable outcome, like that it's pathological, like that's inherent in the social contagion theory. We don't say there's social contagion around kids being academic high achievers, right? We see there's social contagion around anorexia nervosa or suicide clusters, right? We don't say it about good kids. You can go ahead. Right. Gender identity, nobody understands it 100%, but at this point, extensive research on it shows it's multifactorial, biological, psychological, sociocultural, right? There's a lot going on. You can go ahead. And I won't go into this one, but basically, not only is it not abnormal, it's extremely common for transgender identity to emerge in adolescence. Among trans adults, more than half reported first realizing they were trans in adolescence. Right. That is not abnormal. That's really common. You can go ahead. In terms of social media use, well, younger people are more likely to identify as trans, but all age groups have had increased screen time over the past 10 years. And the study that said repeatedly, oh, it's because of social media use, didn't actually collect data from youth or control for social media use. So again, another reason why it's a bad study. You can go ahead. And then if you look at the stats, I just put this up here for contrast, right? These are slightly old data. 90% of 13 to 17-year-olds reported having used social media. This was even pre-pandemic, right? Of those, 51% said they visited a social media site at least once a day. You know, it's more than that now. Average daily screen time, more than 8 hours. Okay, but then remember, how many 13 to 17-year-olds identify as transgender? About 1.4%. Yeah. So, all right, go ahead. So they're the lemmings. Can gender identity be changed through external influence? And the answer is no. You all have probably heard about conversion therapy, and it's basically behavioral or mental health interventions intended to change a person's gender identity, or sexual orientation. It is shameful for the profession of psychiatry that for many years psychiatrists were involved in that. Psychiatrists, psychologists, therapists, people who are trained in how to bring about behavioral change, right? How to help people change their patterns of behaviors and thought that are harmful to them. Well, guess what? We can't. Conversion therapy is ineffective and psychologically damaging. Right? So trained professionals tried for 100 years, couldn't do it. So the 14-year-old on the internet definitely can't do it. Of course, conversion therapy is illegal in, I believe, 19 or 20 states right now, and it's condemned by every major professional medical organization. You can go ahead. I'll spin past this one. I keep saying I'm not going to keep talking, and I apologize. I keep talking. But regret, right? Opponents of gender affirming care, and they're often, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt, some of them, right? Well-intentioned concern not to do harm to trans youth or any youth, right? What if they regret it? It's based on outdated data. It's based on the rare detransitioner stories, people who did change their minds. And I think it's based a lot on fear. All right, you can go ahead. And lots of articles and pictures on that, unfortunately. You can go ahead. The evidence basically shows very, very low rates of regret among who transition socially or medically. You can go ahead. Most adolescents who get gender-affirming hormones for gender dysphoria continue to take them as adults. Rates of regret are low, generally less than 1%. And even after gender-affirming surgery in adults are also low, less than 1%. You can go ahead.
Hey, can you look and make sure my mic is off here? Can you make sure my mic is off?
Your mic is on.
Okay. So I don't know if you guys have heard this. This one gets thrown around a lot in some of the circles, people I talk to who are opponents of gender affirming care. But 8% of people will regret treatment. And you can go ahead. They're misconstruing detransitioning and regret, right? Again, just quickly, there are a lot of you can do the next one. Sorry. 8% was the number of adults who responded to a big U.S. transgender survey in 2015. There was like 28,000 adults. And the question was, have you ever gone back to living as your sex assigned at birth, at least for a while? 8% said yes, they had. Of those, 62% said it was only temporary. And everybody who answered the survey still identified as trans, right? So they were all still trans, but at some point, 8% had gone back to living as their gender assigned at birth. And so the next one. And basically, a secondary analysis showed that most of the people who did so-called detransition cited external factors, things like stigma, rejection, and risk of assault as their primary reasons. You can do the next one. I have a list of other reasons why. There are a lot of reasons why, and that's even among people who are still trans, right? A lot of reasons why you might detransition. You can go ahead. So yeah, detransitioning does not equal regret. And the next one. Bottom line, the scientific evidence strongly supports gender affirming care. Yep. Now you have to watch out for the misleading techniques that opponents use, and I'm sure you've heard all of this. You've seen this in, online in the media, even some reputable media. So they try to create the appearance of scientific debate. sort of like the anti-vaxxers do, right? Websites that pretend to provide neutral expertise, experts, right, with limited qualifications. For example, on the expert panel that reviewed the literature for the Florida AHCA, the Healthcare Administration, none of them cared for gender diverse youth. One of them was a dentist, right? That was not an expert, right? Legal briefs and opinions and reports love to cherry pick resources and sources, and then they present poor quality research as if it were good, like the rapid onset gender dysphoria. Go ahead.
Natalie, I wonder. I'm
Oh,
so sorry, Natalie. I want to make sure that
no, we give time for others. I
give
apologize.
time for others. Are you pretty
These are
close to
both.
the
I
end?
think I'm almost at the end. We can skip this one. I have one happy slide. So
Let's
we
do
gotta
that. Let's do
let's
that.
get to the happy slide. Yes. And I apologize, Erin.
Not at all. No, this is really helpful. And I don't know, I know some folks in the chat were like, can we look at, is there a way we can hold on to these slides? So I'll check in with you about that. But we also, yeah.
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
this is the happy slide, right? And I get to do this one for Episcopalians, right? That the Episcopal Church in Connecticut passed this resolution last fall, that we as, right? We as Christians, we as people of faith, yeah, we can stand up and say, no, right? So anyway, again, I apologize for being so verbose, but thank you for letting me talk. Thanks.
That was awesome. Thank you so much, Natalie. This is super, super helpful. And I think let's hold Q&A for after both presentations. I think we will have a little bit of time afterwards. But thank you so, so much, Natalie. And we are recording this, so people can watch the slides again on our recording and our Spotify channel, which exists, the Gender Justice Jam on Spotify. I want to turn it over now to Alan and Lindsay from the Office of Government Relations for the Episcopal Church to talk about some of our church's advocacy work around gender justice at the federal level. And we are so grateful to have both of you with us tonight. Thank you for making time for us, and the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Erin, and I'm so grateful to the doctor for that wonderful presentation, that wonderful level setting, and very thankful for you inviting us here today. My name is Lindsay Delks, and I am the Domestic Policy Advisor with the Episcopal Church's Office of Government Relations. Under the domestic policy portfolio, I handle just a little bit of everything. Domestic anti-poverty, which we define as like healthcare, food assistance, and housing, criminal justice reform, gun reform, and education, whole host of other things. And the thing that I have learned most about my portfolio is that I cannot ever speak about one without speaking about all of them. And that is the case, especially when it comes to the lens in which we view racial justice and gender justice and LGBTQ IA2S plus justice and how we go about that advocacy. So some of the important things that I cover, as I mentioned, is that as the doctor mentioned, when trans people are not able to have access to that kind of affirming care, there are a real world extreme kind of outcomes to that. Trans and LGBTQ youth in general are overrepresented in the foster care system, overrepresented in the juvenile and adult prison systems, incarceration systems rather, excuse me. Overrepresented in unhomeless youth numbers. Every year, the Housing and Urban Development Office does they call it their annual homelessness assessment report, where they do like a point in time count, where they count the number of people who are unhoused at any given point within the year on any given night. and overwhelmingly amongst what they consider youth, I believe the ages from minors all the way up to like in the early 20s, overwhelmingly LGBT youth are overrepresented there. So some of the work that, especially that I have been involved in is how to make, when we're having these conversations, just make things more equitable, making sure that we're acknowledging all the intersections of this work, making sure that we're acknowledging that there are specific circumstances that have to be taken into account. Is kind of an example of that. Recently, we've been talking through the incarceration of trans and gender nonconforming individuals and how, housing is a significant stressing point, how access to medical treatment and hormone replacement therapy is a significant point, and that is often not met while incarcerated, which can lead to, of course, we know that incarceration is not where it needs to be generally, but those can lead to adverse side effects beyond that. So just really taking those things into account. The Episcopal Church has several resolutions. There is one that encourages us to advocate for policies supporting nutrition, healthcare, and housing as human rights, advocating for the access to gender-affirming care, equity in public education system, which is extremely important. As mentioned before, LGBTQ youth, especially trans youth, have a higher rate of being disciplined within school systems, and they also have higher dropout rates, which, as mentioned before, I cannot mention one thing without mentioning many, many others, and that feeds into an unemployment rate that doubles that of cisgender individuals, and also, kind of just like I mentioned, everything that falls into with housing and incarceration. So that is kind of just some of the work that I do and how it intersects with the domestic policy portfolio. And I will turn it over to my colleague, Alan, for his comments.
Thanks, Lindsay. And just want to echo, gratitude for the speakers this evening, for y'all's openness to having us, and for everyone attending. So I'm the Church Relations Officer with the Office of Government Relations, and lead our advocacy trainings, civil discourse trainings, our election engagement, and then sort of a host of other policy topics. I wanted to share just briefly what our office does and how you can engage. So Lindsay represents the core objective of our office. There are 5 of us who represent the Episcopal Church to the U.S. federal government, and we do so using over 650 resolutions from General Convention and Executive Council. And that process, recognizing we are in an international church, it is limited to the U.S. government. It's also limited to the federal level. Even just that is more than we can handle. But for our international attendees and others, do know that we stay in touch with international parts of the church to try to inform our advocacy on U.S. foreign policy. And that includes on matters pertaining to LGBTQIA 2S+ people. A couple of quick pieces. In terms of our advocacy here, I want to share 3 ways that you can take action. The first is on a piece of legislation called the Equality Act. Second is on supporting queer migrants. And then the third is on supporting reproductive rights. So these are what we call action alerts. This is a chance for you to join in this work with us. You can write your members of Congress directly using a pre-drafted letter. You can edit that letter if you wish. And all of our calls to action are based in those resolutions of the church. So they don't come from our office. Lindsay and I are not creating a particular perspective we use those resolutions to inform what we advocate for. And just one brief note sort of on that, and this will be my last point. If you are interested in a deeper advocacy strategy, please let us know. That is something that we can provide. One point in this that is tricky and I think specific, or legislation impacting the communities we're talking about this evening, are a unfortunately good example of legislation that is actionable and legislation that is more messaging legislation. Certainly, you've heard, I think, a very accurate and important overview of state level legislation. That the state level is where a lot of this is taking place. There is less impact at the federal level in terms of direct legislation to these matters. What Lindsay reviewed, sort of having a layer of awareness of the needs of queer people in across our advocacy is helpful, and really where the work is. And then the Equality Act is a piece of legislation we think can have a chance at moving forward with better composition in Congress. What happens, though, is both on the left and the right, members will introduce legislation that is more extreme, and in order to message to their constituents that they are working on something. Some of that legislation is bad. It is abhorrent in terms of the language, but it does not have a chance of passing. And so when we're being strategic, we're wanting to focus our effort on what can pass, on affirming what we do want, rather than spending time, addressing bills that are not going to move forward, as bad as they may be, because then all we do is further the visibility of that negative perspective. So that's just a note at an example of our advocacy trainings, and one tip in terms of how we address this work from the church. I said that was the last thing. I think one link, because it's relevant for this week, our election engagement toolkit. I'll just put that in the chat for your use, but I'll stop there. Thank you all.
This is so awesome. Thank you both so much, Lindsay and Alan. Just really nice dovetailing too, from this like very rich, more clinical background to like very concrete and immediate things that folks can actually do. And I hope everybody who's following this will share these links with your congregations, with your aunt, with whoever. So thank you all so much. And we've got questions, so let's go to it. I see Christy. Oh, you're on mute, Christy.
Okay, there we go. Hi, thank you both so much. I was an educator, public educator for 20 years until January. And when you said, Lindsay, about how it was important to advocate for young people in the schools, that a light went on for me. I think, I wonder how we can influence the federal government, sort of institute some sort of, LGBTQ council or something to sort of force some oversight in the schools. I think that there'll be support for that. And I feel like that should come from people like us who say, we need to protect these kids. They're at risk. They could die. I just feel like, what could we do to sort of put something in motion like that for kids?
So that it's a little bit of a difficult question, just because I think, like Alan mentioned, so much of what happens at schools is so state and kind of local specific. But I think, as mentioned, our goal is always to kind of get those protections at a federal level. But I will say, one of the things, in doing Hill meetings that I feel like has been so helpful is when congressional leaders are able to hear from their constituents, right? Like when you're able to say, I'm a school teacher And I hear what you're saying, and I hear kind of the rhetoric, but this is what's actually happening in schools. I think that that's just so incredibly helpful to like have those stories out there. I mean, like I said, it's, because it is so like state and local specific. Um, I don't even know. I'm trying to think if there's like legislation right now that like mentions that kind of work, but I'm not super sure. I can go back and check definitely. But once again, just I think being able to share your stories and share your perspective is one of the most helpful things that you can do in a situation like this.
I thank you. I agree with that. Um, but all of those state and local districts accept federal money.
Right.
And if they can make rules for Title IX and ADA, they can do it for our kids too.
Right.
So that's what's frustrating for me is to see that.
It's really frustrating. I think the Equality Act is a partial answer that would look at gender identity and sexual orientation as protected classes. The implications of that across the government, it's not going to answer everything about what you're saying, but it's a partial answer. The other piece that is just a hard part of advocacy is when populations are pitted against each other. So, and when you have to choose between outcomes that aren't great and work with the one that is least bad. So, when there are pushes to completely defund the Department of Education and eliminate it, in aggregate, is that worse of an outcome? Yes, but also, we still want to see protections of trans and queer people overall. So it's tough, those costs of pushing for things that we want that we wish weren't there, but are a part of this navigating a non-neutral world.
So thank you all. I see Carl has a hand up, so let's go to Carl.
Hi. The main thing that I wanted to say is, we looked at that map earlier of the different states that have anti-gender affirming care laws and all that. And it might be easy to think that the people who lived in the states that weren't red have it easy and everything's fine. For example, we live in New York. My trans child is very protected by the laws in New York, but they cannot get their birth certificate changed to their correct gender because they were born in Texas. And Texas has now passed a rule refusing to do any gender marker changes. So those laws in those other states, even if you don't live there, might still affect trans people because they have to travel for work or they have to get their birth certificate changed or things like that. So it's not enough to say, well, if you don't like it in Texas, move to another state, because you're still bound by so much of where you came from. So just wanted to add that to those conversations.
Yeah, good point. And I mean, there's transphobia. I'm in Connecticut, there's transphobia here, right? I have to talk to schools for kids I help take care of to tell them knock it off, right? You got to allow this kid to use the right bathroom. It's our law. Yeah. Being in a state with protective laws, you're right. It doesn't cure it all.
Yeah. I'll just share this briefly. Last year, the Texas, I live in Washington State, and last year the Texas Attorney General attempted to, I think, sue and subpoena all medical records for children at Seattle Children's Hospital because there was this story that all of the children who could not get gender affirming care in Texas were going to Seattle. And so suddenly Seattle Children's Hospital had to be in this legal battle, pay for this legal battle, right? So I think that's a really good point, Carl. I see Miranda, your hand. I think you will probably be our last question.
Okay, I will try to make it a good one then. I guess, first of all, thank you to all of the speakers today. One thing that I'm wondering about is just in the work that you do, and just even in what you've shared with us tonight, I've heard a lot about the ways in which this work can be really frustrating and really disheartening. And so I'm wondering, like, what gives you hope and what keeps you going? And I'm hoping that that can help all of us to remember to find hope and remember to find ways to keep going.
Good job.
I can go first if that's okay. I'll say this. I'm from Georgia. And I think it was, no, I think it was 2022. Senator Warnock came to my college to speak, and he talked about when he was a student at Morehouse, which is in Atlanta, how he got like bit by the bug of service and how that kind of guided, his work, and that's what kind of made him, want to run for Congress. And I always reference back to that conversation, or his speech rather, whenever I think about this work, because I always say to myself, I don't do it for the wins and the losses. I do it because it needs to be done, right? Like someone has to be doing it. There's a million, even the conversation that we're having right now about, gender and queer youth, there's a million people out there right now. Well, I won't say a million. There's a lot of people out there right now who are, working against protections for queer youth. And we know that they need these protections. So, someone has to be, doing something, not to like, put myself on like a high horse or, a savior complex or anything like that. But, the work has to be done. And so I think that's what motivates me is that, if you don't quote unquote win, or you don't get the legislation you want, or legislation is bad, or, X, Y, and Z, you still made your voice heard. People knew that, the legislation I passed, maybe 20 years ago, it would have passed with, no hiccups, no opposition. And now, they see opposition. They see, actually like people are not in favor of this. I was having a conversation with someone, a congressional staffer, recently about gun reform. And he was saying, many, many years ago, people wouldn't run on gun reform from any party. It just wasn't, it wasn't an issue that people, and now, you have candidates who not only will run on gun reform, but they don't get pushback on running for gun reform. And that just shows, the progressions that we've had for that in the recent years. So I think that is kind of what gives me the courage and the hope to continue this work.
That was awesome. Yeah, super inspiring. Being here at a church-sponsored gender jam, this gives me so much hope. Seriously, that the scripture reading and thinking about it in ways that I was raised in a conservative evangelical church. My dad was a pastor, right? Like, and for me, the fact that there is an Episcopal church where, right, we can love Jesus and love people, it's amazing. And that you all are here and that, right? It's amazing. That gives me hope. That gives me a lot of hope.
Yeah, I think, to add to what both of y'all have said, I just the importance of relationship can't be overstated. And these are going to be, I'm talking about relationships that aren't easy. This evening, I think, feels easy, and that's good to have this space to draw energy from, to regroup, to find a new way forward is wonderful. But I also think about these relationships that are hard, and leaning into them. And that's going to look different for each of us. I don't mean to imply folks should be in a risky position to the extent they can control that. But I do think there can be surprising allies out there. And it may be an indirect route to get to them. I think of our office, we've successfully worked with the Southern Baptist Convention on criminal justice reform, immigration, and environmental legislation. We're not going to be very successful on other topics, including ones relevant to tonight's meeting, but there's a relationship that's built there. There's a humanization that happens in that process. My expectation isn't for every single one of you to, go befriend a Southern Baptist church necessarily. But I just use that as an example of there's power in connection, in humanizing others, sometimes even if it's people that are dehumanizing us, and to try to retain um, that higher position, of seeing one another as children of God. It's hard, but I find hope in that.
That's awesome. I swear I didn't tell her to ask that last question, but it was the perfect setup. So thank you so much. And I don't I think that's a good closing prayer. I think it can double as our closing prayer tonight. So thank you all so much. Huge round of applause for our speakers, our presenters, our interpreters. We are so grateful for all of you. Grab those links for the actionable items from OGR in the chat, and we will send. I'm behind on my follow-up emails because my computer died. So you're getting a double whammy follow-up email this week with the recordings and all the resources. Thank you all. God bless and have a good night.
Thank you, Erin. Good night, all.
Good night. Good night.
Good night.